All right, hello everyone. Let's go over Bran, or at least get as far as we can with this. I might have a lot to say about this chapter. It obviously, for those waiting, you guys know it took a while, and there was a lot of thought put into um, every aspect of this chapter. Bran being the essentially the heart and soul of A Song of Ice and Fire, the main character, if there is a main character. I mean, Tyrion and Jon and Dany obviously are big main characters, but Bran kind of gets at the central mysteries of everything in the story. He is the first chapter of A Game of Thrones, and we kind of know that, from the show, at least he is the one that sits the throne at the end. So George R. R. Martin kind of considers Bran the most important character, um, even if he doesn't have the most words written about him. And so we wanted to get this really, really right. And Bran, so we designed this chapter in with the example of the last Bran chapter in A Dance with Dragons as sort of an example. But that chapter is a very unusual Bran chapter. Bran chapters are usually written from the perspective of a young boy. The sentences are short. The language is simple. While Bran 3: A Dance with Dragons breaks from that a little bit. It's more poetic. The sentences are longer, and I don't know if it's just George couldn't balance the two. He wanted a big poetic chapter that uh, or that Bran is growing up, and doesn't have the same simple language. But there is a big difference between how Bran speaks in previous books, um, than how he appears in A Dance with Dragons. It's subtle, but it's there. Um, so we did it more in the style of A Dance with Dragons, though the dialogue tries to capture. There's more dialogue in this than there is in A Dance with Dragons chapter. So we try to get Bran's boy like dialogue and thoughts in there too. It's a tough balance trying to get that right. So we begin with the moon was hidden, its light bleeding into clouds like a wound beneath a silken bandage. And this first paragraph, I probably spent more time on this paragraph than anything else, probably more than maybe even the rest of the chapter by itself. I really wanted to get this beginning right. Um, so what's going on here is obviously, if you remember Dance with Dragons, Bran 3: Dance with Dragons, there are six moon related um, uh, kind of pieces where he says like the moon was crescent, the moon was fat and full, and then there's a poetic image of what's going on outside. So, for instance, Bran 3 begins with the moon was crescent, thin and sharp as the blade of a knife. A pale sun rose and set and rose again. Red leaves whispered in the wind. Dark clouds filled the skies and turned to storms. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled, and dead men with black hands and bright blue eyes shuffled round a cleft of a hillside, but could not enter. Um, so you get these like flash images of everything going on outside before getting into Bran's story. And so we wanted to recreate that. But the thing about Bran 3 is that you get this moon and you get this idea of a lot of time passing, but it's confusing on when Bran 3 takes place. I want to take that even further and make it so we have no idea how much time has taken place with Bran. And I had to actually stress this with people that submitted and the editors, like, no, because a lot of times people would write something that had a little bit of time in there. It's like, no time. We need to have no time, no sense of how much time is passing. And this is important because, one, we want to keep it a surprise of when Bran re-enters the story and where Bran re-enters the story. But also, if this is the story of time traveling Bran, we want this idea that time is frozen now, that Bran is frozen in time, looping in time on this endless cycle of time. In and this is why the moon is hidden. The moon is hidden because time is hidden, and um, but also the moon kind of represents Bran, because the moon talks in Ice and Fire, and we want the moon to kind of represent a lot of things, but we want it to represent time. But because Bran is time traveling Bran is hidden, time is hidden, time traveling Bran is hidden. Everything is we can't mark time or tell time. This is but this is where it's going now. The entire paragraph was inspired by on kind of root level by a essay by Cantus, the theorist Cantus, who has an essay called um, he has an essay called Moon Visions, which is a really clever essay, and I love the essay. Um, I think it's probably not true. I think it's one of those essays that's so good that I wish it were true, but I don't actually buy it. But I was so inspired by it that I wanted that element to be in this. So when I talk about moon visions, like the Cantus essay, he has an essay where he essentially says that the six moon uh, moments of Bran 3, A Dance with Dragons, are actually parallels to other moments in A Dance with Dragons. Um, so, for instance, the first one, the moon was crescent, thin and sharp as the blade of a knife. He goes to another moment in the story where the moon is crescent, and that is like Theon's story at Winterfell, and he kind of says, okay, well, the pale sun rising and setting and rising again, that's like Theon's story. Like he comes back like a phoenix from the ashes. And the red leaves whispering in the wind, the werewood does talk to him and whispers in the winds, right? And the dark clouds filled the skies and turned to storms. Like there was a storm, like when he's there. And so, and, okay. Now keep in mind that the moon appears a lot in the Song of Ice and Fire. There's a lot of storms, a lot of people come back. The trees are constantly whispering and rustling in Ice and Fire, but and that's kind of the strongest parallel. And he goes into the next ones, like the the moon was fat and full, stars wheeled across the sky, rain fell and froze, tree limbs snapped, and Quentius then says, well, what that's Tyrion when he's on the Selsori Koran, he's like under a big bowl of stars, and they're in that storm, and the mast snaps like a tree. Um, and then they kind of get more straining from there. I mean, that would be really great. Like I think it's a really great essay to have a second meaning for everything. But at the end of the day, like I actually don't think George R. R. Martin was doing that. Um, but I wanted to do it because I thought it was such a great idea that these visions aren't just like mood flashes. Like they're mood flashes, but then they go beyond that. So the moon was hidden, its light bleeding into clouds like a wound beneath a silken bandage. By the way, we worked on this sentence so much because George R. R. Martin is very precise with his metaphors. Like you can't just say something like, uh, you know, I bit into the food like a jackhammer into rock. Because you're like, well, jackhammers don't bite. You can't be like, I sunk my teeth into it like a jackhammer. Well, jackhammers don't have teeth. Like if you spoke that metaphor in life, no one's gonna care. But George R. R. Martin's very precise with his metaphors. So this was a problem because I'm like, the moon was hidden, its light bleeding into clouds like a wound beneath a single silken bandage. You know, and the wording of this changed a lot because it's important because moons don't actually bleed like bleed blood. Um, they can bleed light into clouds, but we're trying to say how it's like we all see it, like the sun is bleeding light into the clouds like a wound bleeding blood into a silken bandage. but we have to be very precise with the metaphor, so that it's right, because moons don't bleed blood. They, you know, so it's everything's got to be precise and right, and the wording changed out on this a lot. But I really just once I kind of got the image of like things bleeding into a silken bandage and the sound of that, I knew I wanted to start with the silken bandage kind of idea. But this is the idea that what Bran is feeling, Bran is a wound. This whole situation is this like open wound, and you can kind of imagine the wound on in the brands that all die impaled on the spikes. Like there's this wound and they're all bleeding. And then you go into the snow world atop the windswept fields of white, gusts driving the flakes aloft over and over. There's a spinning aspect, like the loop. Bran is in this loop. This is why the windswept fields gusts, they drive the flakes aloft over and over and over. He's in the time loop. And the forest grew thick with hoarfrost and icicles. The forest, like, it's, yes, there's the sense that like nothing is going on. It's just like continuing on. But remember, the sinkhole is like thick with ice, and between the trees, the corpses kept a steadfast vigil. Like, yes, there are those corpses outside, but remember, like, Bran is a legion of corpses in the sinkhole, keeping their steadfast vigil as the loop goes over and over and over. We're going to get into the metaphor of Bran, like the Night King leading an army of whites, another leading an army of whites, and time traveling Bran leading an army of dead Brans. You know, like this is a kind of the parallel of going on here. But whatever the case, you're supposed to think about it, things being an open wound and time continuing on and being in the loop with this opening. Under the hill, a boy awoke to the sound of a girl's breathing fast and heavy. You know, under the hill is how a lot of the things in Bran 3 end. They say, under the hill, the boy did this and this. So we continue that on. So to Hodor, a little torch in darkness, flickering light, revealing a grim and familiar face. This grim and familiar face returns at the end. Bran sees the faces of the dead boys, and they're grim and familiar. And we're making a connection between the endless pursuit that Meera is doing, her endless and hopeless pursuit for Jojen, and Bran's endless and hopeless pursuit in trying to fix the world through the time loop. And so this is why you get this grim and familiar face. We're making this connection between Bran's search and Meera's search are paralleled. And so I'd been warned by Meera Reed for how long? I keep having to remove like editors being like, for months, weeks. I was like, no, just no time, no time. Time was lost to Bran like so much else. Day was night beneath the earth. Waking was dreaming within the tree. He sat up, his eyes adjusting the light. He recognized the cloak in the hand. Is that his? And so we jump into, this is very George R. R. Martin, jumping into the action of there's a bunch of stuff that happened before, and George likes to just jump right into action, and then you're trying to figure out what happened before as you move forward. So Jojen is missing, which of course is Jojen paste. I mean, we all kind of know that, like, if you're into the Jojen paste theory, like Jojen being missing is like something we kind of all notice at the end of A Dance with Dragons, but you know, it's not so important. It's certainly not very apparent. It's just like, he's gone. We don't trust everybody around us, and we're just going to leave it like that. I'm not sure if we're ever going to reveal what happens to, like, clearly what happens to Jojen, but we just kind of know that, you know, Jojen paste is there. We don't know if Jojen was killed or not. Maybe we'll never find out, but Meera nodded, beads of sweat falling from her red and brown. It was in the tunnel an hour north. I think it was north. Bran couldn't remember the last time she'd spoken so many words to him. Again, like, no idea of like time on this. And then it's like we try to get this boy sound to the Bran dialogue. Oh, that's good, isn't it? Jojen's still here. He wouldn't have left without his cloak. And Meera's just like, good. Like, why did he leave his cloak there? Like, what's going on? Her voice echoed in the passages. Bran shifted on his bed of furs, feeling the strain in his shoulders. This strain is going to get back. I mean, this has to do with he's been here for so long. There's like atrophy to his body because he spends all day um, in the tree. But you know, he may need the shoulders if he's going to try to climb out of this sinkhole. You know, she blames me. And this chapter ended up becoming very much about Meera and Bran's love for Meera. It was a little bit of a shock in A Dance with Dragons when Bran kind of just like has this moment where he thinks about what would happen if he told Meera that he loved her. And, you know, we kind of like go into Bran's obsession with Meera a lot more, which is of course, you know, natural. It's the you know, he's a boy, she's a girl. He's got nobody else around. Of course he's going to attach to her, but you know, she's much older. I doubt she has any feelings for him. It made him think of his father, what he felt before him, even before the Raven came. The little subtle thing here, even before the Raven came, keep in mind that like Bran, the Raven, like the three-eyed crow came and let him know that his father was gone with the dream of the crypts, but then the Raven came, so it's kind of like even before the Raven came. You know, the Raven comes to tell him his father's dead, but he knew kind of before. Most likely got caught in the tunnels. There's so many of them. We get turned around. Now they have the fur. Maybe Summer can find a scent, you know, and then we get into why like Bran. We kind of needed a reason why like Jojen would not be found, because a direwolf should be able to like track these people, right? Um, and so we have this excuse that the caves do queer things to smells. Um, you know, kind of a cop out, but a spooky one, and we kind of get into it later. That Bran is sensing. He is sensing the previous iterations of the timeline with this, and it's not like coming out of nowhere. You know, like when Bran does have his original dreams with the three-eyed crow, he does see like all of the dead dreamers on the spires. So it's like he must have some sort of, whether given by either some sort of sense or given by the three-eyed crow, that there's previous versions, previous iterations of the timeline. So you know, Bran is going to be able to see like, you know, previous iterations of the timeline or have a sense of them. So most of the tunnels have the common odor of dirt and stone. Others reek powerfully of night soil and rot, covering all else. But then there were the other smells. In one passage, Bran was certain he caught a whiff of fish and salt air. There's, you know, I don't want to read too much into these, but this idea is like, well, if Bran is, you know, messing with the whole world, time traveling Bran is messing with the whole world. Like, what are the things he's going to be messing with? Well, maybe he's going to mess with Braavos, with Arya. So maybe he'll catch a whiff of fish and salt air. And another, he's going to catch the stink of apples and cider. And this is the idea of like Old Town and Sam and stuff. Maybe that. And in one burrow was the same aroma that trailed Septon Shale and rose up from the deep shaft where water trickled from the earth. The idea of this deep shaft and the water trickle from the earth is just, you know, connecting to Septon Shale getting thrown down the well. But you know, there's just this, and that brings back like the prophecy from A Clash of Kings about the water coming over the walls, and if that comes from time traveling Bran. But there's some other ideas, you know, like one of the things about I thought about with the Dany Page of Lies kind of stuff with Lemongate is that Dany has memories of like perfumes, and perhaps those perfumes and oils are actually like holy Septon perfumes and oils, and that maybe, you know, he's smelling something from the House of the Red Door here, maybe, you know. But the wolf never scented Jojen. And then Meera says, "Oh no, I'd rather search alone." She always said that when Bran offered his help. He guessed he didn't want anyone to see her cry, but the ravens heard. This gets into Bran's a bit of a stalker, but it's it also just sounds nice how the ravens heard. It was well and good that she should cry. She's a girl, but Bran was almost a man grown. He needed to be strong. So this is just trying to get the little boy in him. Like, oh, girls can cry, boys can't. I've got to be strong. And of course, like Bran was almost a man grown is a reoccurring Bran like theme that we hear constantly. Like Jon opening and clenching his fist, right? Bran was almost a man grown. And this idea, we finally eventually play with that at the end, because it's like Bran sees a bunch of boys that aren't men grown, and he realizes that they're them, because he's not a man grown. He's not almost a man grown. He's years away. He's not almost a man grown. And so this idea that like there's this legion of boys, he's almost a man grown. Well, there's men grown down there, but most of them are not. He's not a man grown. And when he starts recognizing the boys that are him, they're not men grown. But nonetheless, you need to be strong. We'll find Jojen. We will. Didn't know what else to say. There's more. And now we get into near the cloak I found with a sidelong look in darkness. Sidelong look. It's very George. She unwrapped the furs for Bran to see. It was a sword, simple thing at first, but with its hilt and scabbard all black as pitch. Once Meera slid the blade from his leather, though, she could see it was more than that. It glimmered and shone in the torchlight, like 1,000 smoky ripples, and midnight swirling from grip to point. A little more poetic than Bran usually is, saying midnight here, but I felt it was okay. And of course, like Bran, the only Valyrian steel thing Bran's ever seen is ice. So of course he's instantly going to be like ice, but it's not, So we get so we describe the ice and everything, and then we get into Bran's knowledge of things, and we got to remember that Bran is really, really behind on world news. He leaves Winterfell in a Clash of Kings and is on the road, and he hears some stuff from like the Littles, and he hears some stuff from Sam, but Sam doesn't know very much, and then he's lost. So he got some dreams about he had a dream about Robb and Greywind where he's worried, and then later in A Dance with Dragons he talks about Robb being alive again. So he's a bit in denial about whether Robb. So if you're confused here, like, doesn't Bran know Robb's dead? I mean, he does, but he doesn't. He's in denial. So he certainly doesn't know Joffrey's dead. So this idea that like, oh well, Joffrey killed him, and perhaps Robb has won back ice by now. But of course, like, not only is Robb dead, ice is gone. It was destroyed as a sword and split into two. So he says there aren't many of these in the world. Meera brought the blade closer. The hilt, you see, it's dragonbone. Do you know any blade with a dragonbone hilt? This, of course, is a little joke on the blade that stabbed, or the blade that was coming to stab Bran. That cut Catelyn's hands instead was of course a blade with a dragonbone hilt. But Bran doesn't know anything about this, so he's just like, blade with the dragonbone hilt. I don't know. Like, we're supposed to think this as viewers, like, as readers, like, oh, blade with the dragonbone hilt. It's very Bran, but now we have a different blade with a dragonbone hilt. There's no descriptions of Dark Sister, so despite pictures of it with rubies and whatever. So in previous versions and drafts and other people's submissions, they describe it with rubies and stuff, but it was all unnecessary. And if I was going to make this little joke here, you can remove the rubies. It's just a blade with a dragonbone hilt. A simple blade. Bran thought back to all the stories that he'd heard. Oh, even the Dragon Knight, maybe. And of course, this gets into Bran's and his storytelling. He had a sword called Dark Sister, shiny black hilt. He and Sansa liked the old man stories about the Dragon Knight. That's true about Sansa. But Arya always wanted to hear the older ones. This was something I thought about a bit. Like, the idea that the older tales in life might actually have more fighting women in them. That perhaps the world became more sexist as time went on, and that even beyond like Queen Visenya, there might be other older tales of women being warriors and things like this. So he always wanted this kind of idea. Sans wanted to hear the older tales because it is true. Like Numeria is an old tale, Visenya is an old tale, but you can even go beyond this. Maybe even Brave Danny Flint or something like that. But something else, that the world has become more sexist over time. Long before the blade would belong to the Knight of Tears. That's the Dragon Knight is the Knight of Tears. Queen Visenya would win battle. And she says, Dark Sister, I. And after the Dragon Knight, who got it? And it is all kind of logical. Like, Bran loves Aemon the Dragon Knight. It's a very famous story. And if he found Dark Sister, his mind would immediately go to Aemon the Dragon Knight. Like, and so all that's kind of like what I do like about this and how all this chapter comes together is everything here is pretty logical. There's nothing that really just goes crazy. It's quite logical that Meera is going to be wrapped up about her brother and going to be searching for it, things like that. And if they found Dark Sister, this is quite logically what their conversation would be. And so he goes into a little history. He defeated, of course he thinks about it from a Stark perspective, like, he defeated Cregan Stark in a duel, and then did the young dragon conquer Dorne, and then he defended the queen in combat, and then he protected the king from assassins' blades, and afterwards the sword was given to, and he's like, I don't know, and she's like, it was given to Bloodraven. Bloodraven, an evil man, which is Aegon the Fat One. We'll get to it. Aegon the Fat One. Aegon the Unworthy is often called other things. So like Oberyn Martell calls him like Aegon the Randy One, and stuff. So of course, like people have confusion over which Aegon, and so she's gonna call him Aegon the Fat One. And so we kind of then create like the Bloodraven story, which none of this is really new. This is all stuff you can find in different places, but it's never really like concisely in Ice and Fire. Maybe in like the Hedge Knight, not the Hedge Knight, but the Sworn Sword and the Mystery Knight. Getting a Bloodraven stuff. So he used magic to stir up a rebellion. This gets into actually all of the negative Bloodraven stuff that we see in the Dunk and Egg stories. It quite makes sense that she would hear these bad tales about Bloodraven bringing the plague to Westeros. We're talking about the spring sickness. Also, he could rule his hand. We hear people in the Dunk and Egg stories talking like this. He killed thousands, Bloodraven. Bran had his suspicions ever since the Green Seer told him his name. And this is just to kind of correct for George in A Dance with Dragons. It's a little silly that like Bloodraven, who is pretty famous, that Bran, who's heard a million stories, would come upon an albino named Brynden and not immediately with one eye and not immediately think of Bloodraven. So like, we kind of like walk this back and be like, yeah, Bran kind of had his suspicions already, and then we just, we get more of the Bloodraven tale, Sorcerer's Tale of Old Nan told by the Hearth. By the way, I wanted to bring back the Hearth because in A Game of Thrones, we hear about Old Nan telling the stories by the Hearth, and then from then on, it's just stories Old Nan told. And I think people forget that like they would go to the Hearth and Old Nan would tell the story, because even in the Game of Thrones series, like Old Nan is just sitting by the bed telling him stories. So it's nice to bring back the Hearth and remember like their environment, that the family would come together, the kids would come together and sit by the hearth and listen to Old Nan. And then, how would this world deal with like afflictions, like being an albino? He's the god's curse, so he's pale as the dead. And so where his heart should be was only a shard of ice, which is a little reference to the dragon glass shard in the show. So then, he craved the blood of his kin, so he rained arrows upon Daemon, a blood sacrifice. We wouldn't be safe, once it's be like old Nan's like words here. And then she invited him to a great council. So he ate bread and salt. He unsheathed the sword and beheaded him right there. He must have used the same blade in Meera's hand. And then he sent to the wall, got but deserted. Old Nan, we had to be as concise as possible here, went to live among cannibals and necromancers. Necromancer, I guess isn't used, but like necromancy is used. But it's one of those times where you just kind of need to use a new word, somewhat new word, even if George has never used it. And then it's like he outlived his children, then his grandchildren. Just how old is he? We might get into this if we talk about Craster and if Bloodraven is the creator of Craster's Keep or something. We're talking about his children and grandchildren. Just how old is he? This is all a trap. Bloodraven sent the green dreams to Jojen to lure us here. Whatever he's teaching you, it's not worth it. And then we try to create the most scary thing for Bran to think about. He'll kill me, Hodor and Summer. He'll kill all of us. More skulls for his collection. This is referring to the skulls that they see on their way in, but not you. For you, it's worse than death. You'll be trapped in the tree with him with no escape forever. What's scarier than like eternal life in that, in general? And which, considering that the werewood net is a stand-in for heaven and stuff, you've got to kind of make that decision about like the scariness of eternity, the scariness of even heaven and hell, it going on forever. And so we get directly into that. He wouldn't want to go on like that whenever everyone knew he was gone. And Meera, how would it feel to remember her face, her voice as years went by and by? A werewood will live forever. Do the trees ever forget? Could they? Would they ever want to? It's one of the weird things about, like, if you were living forever, and would you be stuck with some bad memory for all time? It's a very frightening idea, and so we want to get into the horror of that. And so Bran's like, "Oh, you want to leave?" And she's like, "Yeah, as soon as I find my brother," which is getting again to like Bran, like, when is he going to leave that pit? Well, he leaves the pit when like he saves the world, when he like solves the problems or whatever. He gets out of the cycle. He leaves the loop when he saves the world, but he's never going to save the world, is this, I guess, the idea? Or it seems like he's never going to save the world, and so she's never going to find Jojen. And then she kind of is being very Meera's being a little disingenuous here, because she then says, "I'll take you to Winterfell where your family's waiting, thinking of the missing boy. Don't you miss your mother, your brothers, and your sisters?" Like, obviously, like, they saw Winterfell in ruin. This idea that their family would be back is not necessarily, like, it's kind of it's very wishful thinking. But she's using it to lure Bran, to try to convince him to leave. So he says, "My dreams are all lies, false visions." False vision. This is a little bit of "And 7 times never kill man." They talk about the false visions. All of them tricks for his dark magics. That's an Ice and Fire thing. Dark magics. Don't you see it? False visions. He wanted he wanted to believe that, so then he could forget about his dreams of Robb and Greywind and his mother. So this is kind of reconciling the denial aspect, because again, like, Bran finds out that Robb and Greywind, or he has a dream that they died. It makes him uncomfortable. Then he thinks about Robb being alive, and so we were kind of trying to reconcile his denial by bringing up, the situation here. And then we get into, we can't leave. The dead wait at the mouth of the cave, and then we bring back the back door 3 leagues north, which is directly from A Dance with Dragons, Bran 2. There is a back door 3 leagues north, and we kind of all know that the door is probably the hold the door. It was the hold the door in the show, so we want to bring the hold the door into the story. I'm going to find him. Jojen might be there already, but we need a reason. And so the sinkhole, and it's going to make his flesh crawl, because he's getting these impressions of the previous timelines, but the previous iteration of the timeline. There's one timeline, but it's so far. If he's lost, the closest turn as we could. And then she says, "Today is not the day I die." We needed a reason for Meera to want to go to the sinkhole. And so the idea that I'd come up with was that today is not the day I die, that she wanted to see daylight. And of course, it's a pretty weak reason, but the idea is that Meera is desperate. And so we're going to get into that, like how it doesn't really make sense that Meera wants to go to the sinkhole. For day, there must be daylight. Jojen's death won't find him down here. Bran opened his mouth to speak. Even before he left Winterfell, Meera said that Jojen's dream dreams were mere warnings, futures that might never come to be, and just now she'd called them all lies. Yet here she was pinning her hope upon one. And I want to say the pinning the hope idea, that is a kind of a little reference to Jon pinning his hope on Melisandre's visions. Like Melisandre, he had no trust in Melisandre and knew she was a liar and didn't believe anything like that she said. But because he thought one of them had to do with Arya, he was pinning his hope on Melisandre, despite the fact that like he didn't trust her, and he wasn't even really into visions and magic and believing in any of that. But she had a vision of Arya, and so here he was pinning his hopes on one. And so he kind of like bring back that idea, like, no, Meera believes in free will, and she believes that the visions, if anything, are warnings. And then she just called them lies, but now she's pinning her hopes on one for Jojen. And so Bran understands, because he had a brother too. And so here he is, like kind of admitting that Robb is dead. But it comes back later because he's in denial. He goes back and forth. He wanted to let her know he understood, to be her friend, to share her pain, to hold her, if it would help even a little. This is getting the creepiness. He wants to hold her because he's in love with her, But the sinkhole, he remembered the burrow. He found the trickle of water, the one to the north. The caves do weird things to smells. And so we bring that back, that idea that the weird things to smells. The reason they can't find Jojen, but now we're bringing it back as a reason why Bran doesn't want to go there, because he's seeing the previous iterations of the timeline. So he did find the way there, but he was scared to go. So, but now he knows Meera won't turn back, and he wants to go with her. So he says, okay, Summer can lead the way. And then here we get a shift in writing style. So if you haven't noticed, like when one of the characters goes into a direwolf, you go into a direwolf point of view. Direwolves, they use different language when they describe things that only wolves would know about, and they describe things in regards to nature and like their life. So for instance, in a Dance with Dragons, when they find the dead mutineers, they're described as they were many as toes on a paw, meaning there's 5. You can't just say there's 5. Like why would a wolf have any concept of numbers, but there was as many as on a paw, that kind of idea. And so we get this shift into the language of the direwolf. And so we're now in Summer's point of view. The skinny girl and the gaunt wolf found the passage just so they remembered it. He paused. Last time he hadn't stepped beyond this point, yet the stink of urine reached him from farther in. This is the direwolf stuff. There's always a talk of like urine and man smells and stuff. What a direwolf is interested in. clear as if he marked the tunnel 1,000 times. There are man smells too, strong ones from many men. And then we got, when you switch back to Bran thinking, interrupting it, which is what happens when you're in the direwolf stuff. So, but not Jojen, Hodor, Meera, and me. He padded forward into the tunnel. There's specific verbs that are used when, so like prowling, padding, stuff like that. It's never walking, it's on a trail of his own scent. At his heels, his packmate followed with sloshing steps. Fire in her paw, because she doesn't have hands, she has paws, because it's a direwolf, and a man claw by her side. Man claw is this very specific, like what the direwolves call swords. Out of the darkness, cold came a light wind, cold wet upon his nose. He sniffed at it. The reek of urine and men grew strong with each step, until something else. He stopped and growled, hair bristling. There's a lot of these like descriptions of like the dog, like and the things he does, like his hair going up and stuff like that, ears perking up, like when you go back and read like all the direwolf kind of stuff. Keep going, Summer. On wary paws, he began again. Farther and farther they stalked over stones and boulders, the tunnel snaking back and forth, thinning and widening and thinning again. The water grew colder until his claws tapped against ice, a thick crust, water flowing deep beneath. It all felt familiar, sweat and fur, urine and blood, cold and death. Wolf began to tire when the gloom of the tunnel finally reached the end, and then within the earth there was a man rock, tall as a bear. Because everything has to be nature related. Tall as a bear. It can't be like 3 meters or whatever, or 3 yards, or it's got to be tall as a bear. It was shaped like the moon. You can't say circle. It's got to be the shape of the moon, right? Black and shiny, like still water at night. Like how would everything is nature related? How does the dire wolf view the world? So he sniffed it and it smelled of rock. It didn't smell of rock. It smelled of ash and man. Yeah, I haven't really decided what the man rock is. Maybe it's some sort of plastic or something, but we just kind of leave a mystery saying it smells of ash and man. But who knows what it is? Is it an oily stone? Is it what? So the girl pressed her paw in the middle and it fell open. A hole of whiteness yawned open behind it, padded through, found a den of ice, frozen fangs. Like again, it's like how the wolf perceives the world, the metaphors and analogies he's going to use. Some as high as her neck. Icy cliff loomed above them. It was very tall, higher even than the icy cliffs they'd seen before. That's the wall he's talking about. So he's saying that the sinkhole is as tall as the wall. And far above, you can make out the sky. She set down the fire and she clambered up like a squirrel up a tree. He tried to follow, but only slipped. His paws were not like hers. She found holes and crevices in the ice that he could not. He sat and waited. And the girl circled the den, walking between the ice teeth. Jojen, she howled, a call of mourning, which, things that a wolf would know about. He had lost a sister as well. That's talking about Lady. He may have lost others too, but he certainly knows that he lost Lady and a brother. This is referring to Rob, and he howled with her. Then his ears pricked up. There was another howl. Her brother, no, someone else. Hodor. Jojen. Hodor. Direwolf bared his teeth. It was coming from the man rock. This idea that the man rock is now, like the door is now yelling Hodor. Hodor, the voice is deafening. Nothing could be heard beside it. And then Bran wakes up. Now previously, like when Hodor like would shake Bran awake, he was very violent. But he's actually learned to be a little more gentle here. But he's shaking Bran awake like he does in, say, the beginning of a Storm of Swords. And he's whispering Hodor, 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 even though the wolf is hearing the screams of Hodor from the door. And then we have Leaf there. And this is this was a big kind of very jarring shift, because he's in the middle of this horrific, like, tense situation and he's taken away. So we end up, this used to happen much faster, that Bran went right into going to his tree and and going into dreams. But we know now, that was very difficult to go for that big shift. So now we kind of have more explanation on like Leaf being there, and Bran having to all of a sudden go with them in order to go to this lesson. So we kind of add the stuff about um, him being unable to refuse, and then kind of this background on like where is Bran with regards to his skin changing abilities. And so we kind of get, he's more advanced now. We still don't have any idea about time, but we get into this idea that a lot of time's passed and he's better than he was. So we kind of get this thing about the different werewoods he's been seeing, and so we have those like fun descriptions of what other werewoods would be like. Like the last hearth is thick, wide as a castle gate. This is this idea that a big, healthy werewood with the Umbers, who are big giants, would be big and healthy and strong, just like the Umbers. Strong with the old gods, a big, strong, healthy werewood. And then we get to Torrance Square. There's more idea that it'd just be like a more sickly one. As if the limb were soon to fall. And then like a gnarled and twisted one at the Dread Fort with gashes and scars. You can picture these old Boltons like abusing their werewood. But more often than not, he goes to Winterfell's because, he can, at least in his subconscious, he's directing where he wants to go. So of course he's going to go back to Winterfell most often. And there he saw his family, and so we kind of get back to like what was old Winterfell like? Well, we know that like Robb and Jon used to swim all the time, and there was a competitive aspect to them, so they'd be racing through the water. His father would pray, Theon would be kissing girls, and then we just kind of we would throw in some other people around there. Van Poole going on a walk, Maester Luwin studying leaves, Hal and Jory and Beth, and originally I had in there Septim Ordain, but I think one of the editors was like, maybe she would feel like uncomfortable around the heart tree. And I was like, okay, I'll just make it Beth. Saw himself climbing on two good legs and how brutal that would be. And we kind of get that next into the brutal aspect. Just this, like, they never hurt him no matter how hard he pleaded. He only wants to stay, but he then gets slipped back into older memories. It's funny, this is all you had to be very specific with the language here, because it's like, it used to say like slipping back in time, but it's like he doesn't really think about it. He wasn't told that this is time. He's been told that this is memories. So back when the tree was younger. So then we see the Starks of old, their flesh is flesh instead of stone, because he recognizes them all from their stone faces. And men so ancient they had no statues, but they were all still named Brandon. And then he would see their prayers, their weddings, their sacrifices, the reasons they would go to the tree. Generally speaking, you go to the tree to pray, you go to the tree to get married, and you go to the tree to sacrifice. And then he could taste them. And so all of that was to deal with this background stuff, which none of it is actually very important, but it's essentially an entire page to deal with that rough transition to you're now doing something new. And so now we have to establish that we're here now, here on the Werewood throne, Bran. But then it's also this rough transition, like what would Bran be thinking about? He'd still be thinking about Meera. So he's sitting on this tree and he's like, well, maybe I should go back to the pit to see Meera, to at least like try to lessen this sharp transition. But instead he goes to a different werewood. so at least he's like, he's claimed a new pair of eyes, but he is farther. And he does get to see beyond the trees, to see her crying, to hear her crying. And so this idea is that like he's going to a new werewood. He's going to and if you pay attention here, it's pretty clear that he's at the Whispers and on Cracklaw Point. because the werewood is looking out on the ocean. He is on a rocky bluff, red ivy about his roots, limbs rustling in the wind, music of waves echoing around him, and he could feel the rush of the water between his toes. The idea is that like he's seeing the tree as his body, so the roots are like his toes. As the sea surged into the caves and tunnels beneath him. This is all the whispers describing it. And then the shore below, men stood clad in strange armor. One by one, they walked into the surf. Water crashed around them, but the march was unflinching, and soon their heads passed under the waves and never surfaced. I saw men going into the sea. And this is, this is the squishers. This is essentially the squishers tale, but this is an idea that like men, like because of the long nights, like men are doing what they can in order to survive, and which is the story that Brynden tells, more or less. But it's very ambiguous. So but yes, if you're reading this being like, is this squishers? Yes, it's squishers. But the idea is that like Brynden would be showing a similar situation to what's going on in the north, perhaps with the others, like people doing what they need to do, people changing in order to survive the long night, to wait. And so Brynden tries to explain all of this the best he can to a young boy who can not understand, though really being more direct would probably be better. But he says, when winter comes, the lakes freeze, the earth grows hard as ice. Where does the game go? The birds and the fish, the worms. It's funny. This is actually the reason this was on my mind. I think this is in Catcher in the Rye. They talk about this, which is a story about people being children forever, right? But there is this discussion of him in New York City wondering where all the fish go when the lakes in Central Park freeze. But he's having this same idea that everybody's waiting for something. We're waiting deep down like a worm for the long night to be over. So he says birds fly south. A little reference as well, because like the birds, we come upon the birds flying south. I think in the Ariane 3, she thinks about the nightingales flying south. I think Maester Lewin taught him that some animals sleep in caves. I don't know where fish and worms go. Do they die? And he said, no, they don't die. They seek refuge from the cold, and there they wait. This is the idea, but what the squishers and the others would be, or any of the monsters that you hear about in the world of Ice and Fire. And so, and Bran hears the story, and then he's just like, he doesn't get it at all. I don't know what that had to do with the men I'd seen. So Meera and Summer return, and they had not found Jojen. The sinkhole is not a way out. It's all ice. They couldn't make it alone. Not with Jojen. The weight would bring a sheet crashing down. They fall below and die. This is actually very similar to what Meera says when they're at the night fort, and she's talking about descending the wall. That she could do it alone, but she couldn't do it with everybody else. So, fairly consistent on her climbing abilities. Die, the raven squawked. Die. It always seems to be threes, right? So die. And then the torch soon burned out, and Bran sat in darkness, listening to Meera crying. This much he could do without the tree, So, just want to, trying to bring it all together. And so, in a sense, like that first part is kind of like a story altogether, which is by itself a nice self-contained story where he wanted to we kind of bring back the ravens herd. Like he was using the ravens to spy on her, and he wanted to use the tree to spy on her, but he didn't get to use this tree to spy on her. And so in the end, he ends up hearing her cry anyway, without the tree and without the ravens. And so now we go back to the moon was hidden, a gash in the sky, shrouded by clouds steeped in light. Again, with this idea of of it being wound. This wound that's hidden, and we don't know about time. Steep steep is something that's like is usually something that's wet and saturated, while like but he does talk about light like clouds being steeped in light. This is George R. Martin uses that kind of term. So in a sense, like we're still continuing this blood aspect of the clouds by using the verb steeped. And the forest stood deathly still, which again we've got that forest again with the which is the the metaphor that it's also the pit, deathly still. Well, because they're all dead in there, so they're deathly still. Summer's pack, spare and hungry, prowled the surface for dead game. And this is also going to come in later about the wolves and everything up top, and we wanted to mention them. But it does seem that like nothing is going on, like everything's just kind of there. The singers in their caves below dreamed on their tangled throne. It's kind of just give a shout out to these characters that don't do anything, but they're there, like Summer's pack and the singers. And then beneath the blanket of snow, the corpses only stirred. All seemed frozen, waiting, because this again, time is waiting. Time is frozen. That's the thing, is Bran is kind of frozen in time and in a loop, so everything's frozen. And for that reason, Bran's like, Bran, I'm not a worm. So the day came to ask the Green Steward who he was. We get more on Bloodraven's backstory. So Bloodraven says, yeah, the singers love a villain. Half the tales are lies, but no more than half. I was a monster. I was not a monster, but as a monster. He's kind of equivocating here. I mean, were they lies or not? Were you the monster or not? But he gets it. He says all the good I did was for the realm. We're kind of getting into this for the realm kind of ideas that Pycelle and Varys kind of talk about, the draconian things in order to create the greater good. And this is the thing, is if it cost one bastard's honor, the price came cheap. Because we're eventually going to get in what is Bran sacrificing. And so what is Bloodraven sacrificing? So Bloodraven has sacrificed everything in order to save the realm, in his mind. Bran shook his head. He tried to imagine himself raining arrows down Rickon, going to war against Robb, executing Jon Snow. So this is kind of specific to the brothers. So raining arrows down on Rickon is paralleling, when he's talking about that, he's talking about Bloodraven raining arrows upon Daemon, and going to war against Robb. He's talking about Bloodraven going to war against Bittersteel. And executing Jon Snow, we do have the nephew getting executed, but the idea is that there are other brothers of Bittersteel of Bittersteel and Bloodraven that we haven't heard about. There's like Aegon the Unworthy had a whole bunch of bastards, and I imagine there's a whole bunch of brothers that exist in the war that Bloodraven probably executed. And I'm specifically thinking about the Butterwell bastards. So Aegon the Unworthy supposedly impregnated every one of Lord Butterwell's daughters, and so the idea is that, and Butterwell was a Blackfire supporter. So the idea that there would be a whole bunch of brothers, like Bloodraven, when he goes to war and he kills all these people, he's killing a lot of his brothers out there, or at least his half brothers. So, and this idea, it's not as having the execution of Jon Snow. It's not as perfect as having Daemon and Bittersteel, but it's more important for the future, because we're talking about if time traveling Bran is responsible for everything, and we kind of know that like Jon Snow does die. Like he needs to think about all of these different things, like all of his brothers and what he's sacrificing, specifically sacrificing Jon Snow, you know, 'cause Jon Snow is like executed at the end of A Dance with Dragons. He couldn't do it. What good could it do the realm to kill your brother as your own kin? And this is where we're getting into time traveling Bran. Like, if the only path forward in saving the world is killing his brothers, like, what good, you know, this is what we're really getting at, is that Bloodraven killed his brothers for the good of the realm. Like, what is time traveling Bran willing to do for the good of the realm? And, you know, this is what we're kind of asking and discovering. But these are some very, very important questions that Bran is asking himself. And then we find out that actually Bloodraven deeply loved his brother Daemon. You know, and he goes into how Daemon was teaching him how to fight and was this teacher for him, and he loved him, and yet, you know, Daemon was his mother's son, and he knew he had the blood. So this gets into, if you want, the Dragon X theory, but it's you know, it's a logical reason on why Bloodraven would be against Daemon. At least a more logical one than we've ever been given, because we know that Bloodraven does say in A Dance with Dragons that he loves his brother. He loves Daemon. Yet, and he says he has a brother he loved and a brother he hated. Well, the brother he hated, we know, is Bittersteel, because Bittersteel and he both vied for Sheriff Seastar's affections. The brother he loved must be Daemon. I mean, unless it's going to be some Butterwell bastard, but he's the only one he kind of knows is Daemon, right? So we need to have a good reason, and it can't be just be like, oh, I really am against bastards, and I think Daeron is trueborn, and he's the Red King. No, there has to be something more important. And so, you know, this is the explanation that Bloodraven was trying to stop the return of dragons, and Daemon wanted to bring it back. You know, and that if you go on the family tree, you know that Daemon's mother was Nerys, and she was a descendant of Aegon the Third, and she's a descendant of Rhaenyra. While if you go to, or I'm sorry, Daemon is the not Nerys, because Nerys is who's with Aemon the Dragon Knight. Dana, he's the son of Dana, and Dana is a child of Aegon the Third and Daenerys Velaryon. Aegon the Third being having Velaryon blood, and continuing on kind of that lineage, rather than Viserys II's lineage, who knows about Viserys II's like lineage anyway, because he was kidnapped and discovered alive. Who knows if there was a body swap, but whatever the case is, the idea is that Dana had special blood, and we kind of have evidence of this in that Baelor the Blessed locked them in the Maiden Vault and all sorts of stuff. And so only Aegon the Unworthy was able to impregnate one. So it would all it kind of all makes sense. It all makes sense with if you go Dragon X, or just so. And so then Bran's like, dragons, you know, we're going to bring him back old Nan. She smelled the comet, and then he wondered what dragons smelled like. This is all from A Clash of Kings, Blood and Fire Boy, Nothing Sweet. And then we then get into the Bloodraven's explanation. The world has a balance and guardians to keep it. This is Guardians is a specific mention to the tough voyaging story Guardians, which is where the term green dreams comes from. And so they talk about them dreaming musical dreams together. And so this is the melody of dreams, green dreams, is specifically from Guardians, and this is a reference to that. And so we're getting this long explanation, but of why Bloodraven is in this tree. And I hope we fully explain it all. There's still a little more that we need to explain next time, especially with regards to Craster's Keep. But you know, we really kind of explain it all. We try to explain it all here. It's a lot of exposition, but and then we kind of get into like why you're special, Brandon Stark. And he says, "I knew from the moment you were born that you could be my apprentice." Um, and he says, "Then I sent my retainer." And he's like, "Oh, you mean Coldhands?" And so now we're trying to explain Coldhands. I mean, this chapter is like, I guess going through it, I'm like, wow, we do spend just a lot of time like trying to explain everything that's happened as much as we can because we don't have very much time. So now we got to explain who Coldhands is. And one of the interesting things about George R. R. Martin's writing is that he tries to have logical answers to things often that are more brutal and more real, but they're actually, because they're more real, they're not quite as interesting or out there sometimes, but because they're real, they have more emotional weight. So when people say like, "Oh, who's Coldhands? Could Coldhands be Dunk? You know, who's Coldhands? Could Coldhands be Benjen?" In this situation, like Coldhands being just some friend of Bloodraven sounds like a much more boring answer. But when you actually examine it, it actually holds much more emotional weight. The logical answer actually holds more emotional weight. Because here we've got Bloodraven. If it's his friend, then he has all of the pain of the fact that his friend is sending around and commanding around a dead body version of his friend, which is much more like akin to Thoros of Myr and Beric Dondarrion and things like that. And so in a way, like the more boring answer that it's just some friend of Bloodraven is actually like, you know, it's more of a punch in the gut than it's Benjen, it's Dunk. Because then it's like, well, who cares? Who cares? Like Bloodraven wouldn't care if it's Dunk. Yeah, the fan is sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, it's Dunk," but it doesn't bring any emotion to the story. It doesn't make us learn more about the characters. It's just, you know. So I think in the end, like Sir Thomas Rivers is just a sadder. It's a sadder story, and more emotionally powerful story than it being somebody more interesting, supposedly. And just this idea that, you know, they were long friends. Trinnemer's Rivers, same as mine. Curse made us brothers in a way. He was my man, my dear friend. We fought together in Regress Field. When we were, you know, scarce more than boys. And Bloodraven was just like a boy. He was like 18 or something when he was in that war. Accompanied me to court and then to exile. Like long friends. And is he dead? And even like such good friends, you also wonder like if they perhaps had a relationship. Can we bring him back? Bran saw his father's face once more. This is going into Arya. When Arya finds out about like Beric Dondarrion being brought to life, she immediately thinks about the resurrection of her father. So Bran is thinking about the resurrection of his father. So he says, no one comes back. They brought him to my side beneath the earth. This is a little, no one's caught this, but like this bugs me like a little bit, but I don't think there's any way around it. Like the cave is warded. So like, how are they bringing him beside him? But I guess maybe the ward was added later, or maybe they brought down the ward and brought it back up. But or maybe, you know, but Coldhands being brought to Bloodraven's side is a little bit of a wait. How did that happen? Because the cave mouth is warded. So then we get into this long the long discussion of him coming back to life and the poetry of it. Oh, the flesh moves and everything. There's naught but ash and where a hearth once blazed bright. My love makes him lumber, or else it's my mourning. And with that like line, we're supposed to think about Lady Stoneheart or Beric Dondarrion. Like, is Beric Dondarrion really being brought back by the Lord of the Light, or is he brought back by Thoros of Myr's mourning for his friend? Is Lady Stoneheart brought back by the Lord of Light and Thoros' magic, or is he brought back by Nymeria and Arya's mourning and saying like, wake up. So we just kind of leave it like that, leave it as that. Like, what is making him lumber? Well, it's Bloodraven's mourning makes him lumber, but it's not really him. Just like Beric Dondarrion or Lady Stoneheart. It's a husk with no cob beneath, the dimmest memory of a harvest long past. I do not recall the taste of sweet corn, nor the sound of the night's laughter, yet my sorrow lingers, and so does he. And then I wrote all this, and then I was like, then I realized, oh, this is perfect for corn. Corn. This was kind of by accident. This was actually all written for a while, like about, because it was mainly about bringing in a harvest, and you start you start thinking about autumn harvest, and corn is the first thing I kind of think of in an autumn harvest. So like, but so sweet corn was kind of there, but after all this, it kind of came to me like, oh wait, corn, of course, like, but then it gets all of this meaning, because in this, like, the taste of sweet corn is like your soul, the essence of you, right? And so this this idea of the three-eyed crow saying to Bran, like, say, got any corn, and all these like birds saying corn, 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 like they're saying something, you think it's this innocuous word, but in this sense, like, corn means like one's soul, one's essence in this story. Like he the taste of sweet corn, is like the soul of the ear is the corn, and he's just an empty husk. Corn. And then I kind of love this, that like Bran, he should have felt pity on the Greenseer, but he's a little kid, and he's also like tired of Bloodraven at this point. So he's just thinking of himself, and he's just done with this guy. And so he started thinking of the harvest feast, the apples and onions and venison pie, boars, beets, and turnips. What I love about this as well is that like at the harvest feast, the beets and turnips he didn't like, so he actually sent those to Walder and Walder. But here, like, he's so hungry that he's thinking like, oh, beets and turnips, like, that'd be great right now. But all of these were from the harvest feast. Jojen and Meera had been there, and he sent them mutton chops and beef barley stew. That's true. And she did smile at him, and the queer O's, I swear it by earth and water, I swear it by bronze and iron. And I felt it was just a little too on the nose to mention the last one, which we swear it by ice and fire, but we just left that one out. But it's the unsaid one. And then here, I really love this little bit here, and I think it's one of the great, like, by itself, it's one of the best, most concise arguments for Bloodraven not being the three-eyed crow, which is just, Jojen thought his dreams came from the old gods since they foretold the future, but this god, he only peered into the past, an endless memory of what he'd lost. He couldn't see the future. He was just a sad man in a tree. And it's true that in A Dance with Dragons, we get no notion that Bloodraven can see the future. None. But if he's the three-eyed crow, he should be able to predict the future. But we have no sense of that. He's just this, like, is Bloodraven the three-eyed crow? I don't know. He just seems like a sad man in a tree. He's just a sad man in a tree, And so I almost think that, like, all the discussion about time traveling Bran and things like this, like, and the discussion about like Bloodraven hearing the term three-eyed crow and being confused and stuff like that, I think the strongest argument is like he has no notion of the future. He's just there. He's just a sad man in a tree. And then from there we then go to, well, if it's not, he's clarifying, wait, if you're just a sad man in a tree, like, who sent the visions to Jojen, because there's some very important things there. So he says, "Oh well, the boy from the Kranix? No, no, not him. Um, you're he's got power, but this line is kind of funny. The star may shine bright, but it's never be the sun. Of course, stars are the sun. Stars are suns, so they are just as bright. And this kind of gets into Euron's like, maybe we can all fly thing, like where it's like, where Bloodraven's kind of an idiot here. He's like, a star may shine, but it's never be the sun. Stars are suns. Like this line used to be different. It used to be like candle may burn bright, and I was like, no, let's make it a star, because he's being an idiot. The boy is your companion. But I summon you, Brandon Stark. And he really does seem kind of clueless about, because he's actually speaking of Jojen in the present tense here. So it seems Bloodraven's even confused and clueless about Jojen being dead, which is interesting. And then I say, call Brandon the child of Bat and Wolf. If this is like the wolf is Stark and the bat is like the Went Lodston like lineage of his mother. So that's what it's getting at. And then he says, "Oh, but my green dreams, the crow. You told him of the crypts and the night fort. This is a very, very subtle thing about the crypts, because Jojen is having dreams about the crypts in A Clash of Kings, and then they end up hiding in the crypts. And it's never really like you have to draw a line between the dots, but it's like, oh, that gave them that idea to hide in the crypts. What was getting the dreams, not the and so it's important that they did that, because that's how they escape, obviously. And then the night fort, without the dreams, I would have never found you. And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I just sent Coldhands to find you, and you were at the night fort, so he went there. And so he keeps going into this, and he says like, poetically, that I'm getting old, I'm going into the tree, my eyes have gone dim, skin bark, soil is bread, heart pumps sap, someone must direct the course of man, hew down shoots, must be you, I have to teach you more. And we get into this idea that I'm the Lord Commander and you my steward, much in the same way that, like, Mormont was the Lord Commander and Jon Snow is steward. And then we get into the for this night and all the nights to come. And he says forever. And you get that like bolt of the fear going back, let's see. Should I continue? I've been doing this almost an hour 20. I'll get into the fun stuff next time. I know there's a lot of fun Easter eggs coming in, but that'll come next time. So I'll see you in part 2. All right, thanks. I'll see you next time. Bye.